Hi guys. So today we're going to continue on with the second part of our exploration into life force and vitality. And this was really kicked off in the previous video, so part 1. If you haven't seen that, I suggest you go back to that one and begin there, because there's going to be some stuff that's spoken about in this video that may not necessarily make sense. So just to kind of sum up and continue on from where we left off, what we've been talking about and what we've been exploring is the role of the cardiovascular system in carrying and moving life force through the body, making life force available on that tissue level to all of our cells and allowing that life force to flow, or that chi to flow in the way that is intended. And what we've explored and kind of come to is that perhaps there is an electromagnetic, so an electrical force, an electrical process that is occurring in the body, particularly at the capillary level, which is allowing and encouraging and reinforcing the flow of this life force, the flow of this blood, which is the carrier of the life force. What's the liquid component of the blood, which is the carrier of this life force, to be moved through the body. And what we're exploring and having a look at is that this electrical process that is occurring in the body, which is stimulating and supporting the flow of the blood and the flow of this life force, is dependent on the structure, the structural makeup of the water that exists in our bloodstream, but in our bodies, just as a general. And what we're exploring as a possibility as well is that this water, the structure of this water, is directly dependent on an external source of life force. So part of what we explored in our last video was the possibility that it's the structure of the water, so the ability for the water to be separated into its negatively charged and positively charged ions, that allows the flow of liquid through the veins and consequently allows the flow of life force through the system to occur. But what we also began to look at as well is that this water is only able to move in and be in the structure that is appropriate for this electrical current to occur, because that's an electrical process that's occurring there. The separation of the ions, the cultivation of the positively charged ions in the center, causing this propelling and this moving forward of the liquid and of the water itself. That's very much an electrical process. And what we're considering is the possibility that that electrical process, that ability for the water to be structured correctly in this way, which allows that electrical process to occur, is dependent on, again, the presence of an external source of life force. So something that we briefly had a look at was that what we're beginning to be able to observe, and what a lot of the ancient teachings have believed and have understood, is that when you take that liquid and you put it into a tube that is lined with hydrophilic proteins, and you place it against something or in something which contains a natural source of an electromagnetic field, then that liquid begins to move. So what that suggests is that it's by reconnecting with nature, reconnecting with the sun, reconnecting with the planet, reconnecting with the plants, because this same thing is occurring in the plants. That xylem tube, that flow of the nutrients and the liquid moving up through the tree, is happening through this same process. It's that same electrical current, it's that same electrical movement that is allowing the water to be propelled up these vast and enormous tree trunks, and it's what brings life force to all of the plants that we see out in nature as well. So it's not just us. In a lot of ways, we're very similar to our environment, and that's part of what this exploration is about. It's linking us with our environment through the dependency and through our connection through this life force that flows through all of us, that flows through everything. And I guess an easy way, a kind of simple way to look at this life force, we can just relate it briefly to an electrical appliance. So in an electrical appliance, all of the things are present, all of the parts, all of the little motors, all of the wiring, all of the components are present in that electrical device that is going to allow it to function and allow it to fulfill whatever purpose it's been intended for it to fulfill. But just the presence of the bits and the parts that are necessary for that electrical appliance to be the electrical appliance that it is not enough to stimulate the electrical appliance to perform its function. So what I'm getting at here is that in order for that electrical appliance, which has all of its parts, it has everything in there, everything's ready to go, it's engineered and built to perform a particular function, it does not come to life. There is no movement. It is not able to perform its function until we plug it in to the electrical circuitry that's already flowing through the walls in the building that we're in, or if we're outside, then outside. So it's by plugging the device into a source of power, into a source of what is life for that particular device, that we're going to see the device come to life in the way that it was intended. The electricity needs to move from its source and into the device so that the device can perform its function. And it's much the same what I'm describing here with our bodies. We have all of the bits that we need. Everything's in place, everything's been designed and engineered perfectly and has been built to perform a particular function. But it's not until we plug ourselves in to the source of power for us, which is that life force, which is naturally occurring, it's not until we plug ourselves into that this system and these functions are able to come to life and actually begin to function in the way that it was intended. It's like plugging us into the wall. But what I'm suggesting here is that instead of being plugged into a wall, which is allowing us to come to life, it's us being plugged into nature itself, the electromagnetic field, which is emitted by the sun, which exists within the planet and comes out through the planet and through all of her kingdoms, so mineral, plant, animal, human kingdom, that allows us to be animated and allows us to be filled with the life force that allows us to live and to be alive. And when we put it like that, it makes sense, doesn't it? It's pretty simple and it's pretty self-explanatory, but so many of us have forgotten. We've forgotten about our dependence on nature and on the life force that is being constantly transmitted by nature for us to be able to function. And more what we're seeing is people separating themselves off and isolating themselves from nature and attempting to function as a unit in and of themselves. And what I'm going to suggest here is that perhaps it is this isolation that is contributing to at least some amount of the disease and the dysfunction that humanity as a collective is currently experiencing. And it's going to be the reconnection with nature that's going to allow us to return back to a state of health, back to a state of harmony, back to a state of synthesis where we can move and work with our environment instead of constantly attempting to oppose it. So something that we briefly explored as well is the fact that what causes this life force, this flow, to stop is the presence of electromagnetic fields that are not naturally occurring. So instead of that, the unnatural electromagnetic fields being something that we can plug into and receive life force from, that's actually a dysfunctional electromagnetic field that when we attempt to plug into it, it counteracts the life force and the flow of this life force through our system. So that means a lot of, and it's everywhere now. It's the Wi-Fi, it's the Bluetooth, it's the mobile phones, it's the screens, it's anything that's freestanding and which is inevitably transmitting an electromagnetic field which is contrary and counteracts the electromagnetic field, which is the life force that moves through our body. And what we see is a lot of people, more and more this is occurring, people are isolating themselves inside. So they're locking themselves into a room or a house where the air is filled with Wi-Fi and there's a screen strapped to the side of their head and there's a screen in front of them and they've got a transmitting watch on their wrist and they're surrounded by these devices that are transmitting these electromagnetic frequencies which are harmful to the body. And what happens when these electromagnetic fields begin to interfere with that flow of life force, or when anything is interfering with that natural flow of life force in the system, is that it slows down the life force itself, the nutrients, the chi, the blood. It slows down and it becomes stagnant. And when that happens, the system isn't receiving the life force that it requires to remain vibrant, to remain enlivened, to remain interacting and functional. And we see this a lot of the lethargy, the depression, the slowness, the brain fog, all of that stuff can be linked, possibly, can be linked to the presence of these harmful electromagnetic frequencies that we're constantly taking up and that we're allowing into our system in place of the naturally occurring electromagnetic frequencies which will encourage and support the flow of blood and the flow of that life force in the system. So I'll talk briefly about vitality, because this is a really important part of this. Vitality is basically the measurement of the system or the measurement of the life force that is flowing through the system and the system's ability to respond to and work with that life force. So how it should be and how it was intended for it to be, again, it's a bit like that electrical device. When you plug that electrical device into the wall and into its source of power, when you first plug that device in, it may take a bit of time for the electricity to move into the device and to be dispersed all the way through to the device so that the device can function at its highest and most optimal level of performance. And it's the same with us. When we plug our systems back into the natural electromagnetic field which is occurring in nature, it can take time for us to become completely filled with that electromagnetic frequency. So it's not just something that can happen like this and then all of a sudden all of your cells are filled with this energy. What it requires is a consistent and pretty constant plugging in with these natural sources of energy to allow the system to become fully enlivened and fully, it's like it becomes absorbed and contains this life force. And what you'll see and what we'll experience and what we see when people are going through their process of healing and they're beginning to plug back in and they're beginning to get back in flow with nature and with what works for them, is that there can be some improvement, but it may take time. And that's because this life force needs to be allowed the time to move, to be able to start moving the blood properly and appropriately to start with, to begin to be able to really kick off that process of circulation, the circulation of the life force in the blood. But that life force, once the blood becomes full of it, begins to move into every single one of the cells in our body. And we begin to experience a vibrancy on a cellular level, which is different to when that life force isn't there. And that takes time. It takes as long as it takes for the blood to, I guess, adjust and adapt the cellular, the water component of all of the cells in our body. And what then begins to happen once the body is full of this vibrancy and full of this life force is this life force is then able to kind of trickle out and begin to feel our etheric field. So the etheric field is like the electrical component of us that we can't see but is moving around outside of our body. And when viewed, the etheric field would be seen as the aura. And the aura can be pictured, it can be seen. And in certain individuals where there's health and where there is a connection with nature and that flow of life force is allowed to occur, you'll see vibrancy, you'll see a fullness, you'll see a big aura. It will begin to grow and it will begin to expand. And in ones that have been disconnected from nature and are in a state of dis-ease will tend to have more of a kind of depleted etheric field, and there's this kind of greeny tinge that comes over the etheric field, which can be an indication that that individual, that particular individual, is moving into a state of decline. And intervention at that level, so reconnecting with nature and re-stimulating that vital life force, could go a long way in assisting that person to not degrade all the way into a disease state, but instead catch it, recover and rebuild that vitality and that level of health that is possible and was possible before. So what we see when we spend a significant amount of time reconnecting with nature and connecting into this naturally occurring electromagnetic field and allowing life force to flow through us in the way that it was intended, is that we become full of it, we become made up of it. And that's when you start to see sparkle in people's eyes, and they're energized, and there's a vibrancy, and there's something really life affirming about those kinds of individuals. It's something that you end up being able to see because that life force is so strong. And when we plug in with nature in this way, and that would be vitality, their vitality is strong. And when we remain plugged in with nature in this way, it's like that electrical device. It may take a bit of time to get working and to get started when it's first plugged into the wall, but once it's plugged into that electrical circuit, it becomes one with the electrical circuit, and very effortlessly that electrical device will just keep running. It will just keep going, and it doesn't require you to turn off and then put in a huge surge and a huge amount of energy again for it to start again. It will just keep running very naturally, very simply, and will be integrated into that full electrical circuit as just part of the electrical circuit. And it's the same with our bodies. When we're connecting back in with nature, if we continue to exist in a state of flow and connection with nature and with this electromagnetic field, this life force, then it does not take an enormous amount of energy to keep that life force flowing, to keep that individual in a state of health. Of course, there are habits like eating habits, sleeping habits, lifestyle habits that individual will need to adhere to so that they can be in flow with this life force. But once that's happening, once you're plugged into the circuit, if you remain connected and don't disconnect yourself, then that flow of that life force and that experience of health should become quite effortless and should become quite simple. You keep up with the good habits, you stay connected, and life force will continue to flow through you. You become integrated into the system itself. But what happens when individuals begin to unplug themselves from this circuit, this life force circuitry, and they begin to disconnect from nature and spend most of their time in unnaturally electromagnetically charged rooms with devices strapped to them, and they're surrounded by all of these harmful frequencies, then that connection with the naturally occurring life force slows, because that's not what you're connected into. That's not where you're getting your energy from. You're no longer receiving your energy from the sun itself or from the planet itself. You are interacting with these frequencies and these electric fields which are harmful to you. And that's just like jumping into a sewer. You're in gross water. You're in a harmful environment, and it will seep in. It will get through, and it will have an impact, and you will be cut off from the clean water or from the clean environment because you are submerged in a sewer. I'm not saying that being in a room like that is like being in a sewer, but I'm just making that comparison so it's a bit clearer about what effect these kinds of environments are having on our system. So when you disconnect yourself from the natural electromagnetic field, that natural flow of life force, you don't immediately shut down. It's not like the device when it's pulled out of the wall. Well, in some ways it is, because sometimes devices, like if you've got a television plugged in and there's a light on the television, even after you unplug it from the wall, it can take time, can't it, for that light to dim, and eventually as it dims, it does go off, but it can take a bit of time, and that's because there still is electricity flowing through that electrical device for a period of time. And in that sense, yes, it is similar to our experience. When we cut ourselves off from this life force that is flowing through everything and instead submerge ourselves in unnatural sources of energy, then we're cut off. And although we don't immediately become depleted and become degraded, what does happen is instead of being able to utilize the life force that's flowing all around us, we start using up the life force that we have stored in our bodies on a cellular level. But before that, even before that, we begin to draw on and use up the life force that we have stored in our etheric field, so in that aura. And that's the first thing that starts to happen. You're cut off from your life, your source of life. You're cut off from that energy. So your system, instead of shutting down, it just goes, all right, well, we got to get it from somewhere else. And it will begin to suck up, and it will begin to deplete the life force that you had stored on that etheric, so on that energetic level. And it will begin to use that to keep itself flowing. And there will be a slowing of the chi. That's just naturally going to be part of it. But for a time, the system can use this, can use what's available in your energetic field. And then eventually, as that depletes a bit and you start to go that funny green color, and things start slowing down more and more, then the system, the body, will begin to start drawing on the life force that you have stored in your body on a cellular level. And that's when we begin to see the manifestation of physical diseased states. We may see mental and emotional disease states before this point because of that disconnection and because of that depletion that's occurring on these higher levels. But we'll start to see physical degradation when the physical body has been cut off from sources of life force and has begun to suck the life force out of your physical cells in order for the physical processes of the body to continue running. And we see this a lot. A lot of people are living in this state where they are, and you can correct this, you can partially correct this, through diet. And a lot of people they are propping themselves up and they're keeping themselves fueled on the life force in their diet. But there is still going to be that degradation that's happening on that physical level because you're cut off. And that's how we would measure vitality. The measurement of vitality is how smoothly, how simply, how accurately that flow of life force is occurring. So obviously when you're plugged in and the life force is flowing freely and flowing smoothly, that's an indication of a higher level of vitality. That person can handle more because there's more life force flowing. But as you are cut off from that life force and that life force begins to degrade, so too does the vitality. So too does the strength of that individual and the ability for that individual to adapt to the environment and to adapt to states of disease and whatever it is that's going on for them. And there's plenty that we can do. There's plenty that doctors do and that naturopaths do and chiropractors do, and all of these individuals in these healing modalities can do to support the system when it's in that state of being depleted. But what I'm going to suggest here is that perhaps one of the most vital things is reconnecting with nature. It's connecting back into that life force that is flowing through nature and allowing that life force to begin to flow through us once again. And this is something, again, that was really emphasized in traditional medicine. So not even too long ago, maybe 200 years ago, if that, there was this really strong emphasis on sitting in the sun. So when someone was unwell, they would send them to the coast. Go and spend some time at the beach where there's fresh air and there's water and there's sand and there's sunlight. And so there was this kind of sun therapy, and there was hydrotherapy, where to come out of that depleted state, we would go and immerse ourselves in natural bodies of water, which are full of vitality. They're full of this life force. They're full of minerals. They're full of structured water, which is going to assist our water in our own bodies to become structured again as well. And there were these natural things that we would do to stimulate that vital force, to stimulate that life force and get that flowing and get that moving again. And we still do that to a certain degree, and in naturopathy, this is a really big focus of what we do, that we stimulate the healing power of nature even before we prescribe anything, before we even consider offering medicines or supplements or any other kind of interventions. The first thing is to come back to stimulating the healing power of nature, and that is stimulating the healing power of that vital force, of that life force, and rebuilding and re-establishing that vitality in the self, reconnecting the self with nature. Because we believe in naturopathy that reconnection with nature is responsible for bringing about an enormous amount of healing. And of course, there are times and situations very often where we need more than that, just because the system is in such a depleted state. So we might need to support the adrenals, or maybe they've degraded into a state where they're experiencing diabetes or heart problems or whatever, or depression. And when we see that level of degradation, there needs to be some kind of a physical intervention, because the physical cells themselves are beginning to suffer, are beginning to struggle, and need extra support, extra oomph to allow them to move back into a state of health. But that healing power of nature, reconnecting with the life force that flows through everything, is going to be a vital component of healing for any individual, wherever they're at. And so that's probably the most important thing that I have to share with you guys. It's that reconnection with nature, re-establishing that connection with the life force that flows through everything, and allowing that life force to flow through you, through us. And again, just looking at various ways that we can do that, we can keep it really simple. We can go and sit in the sun for 10 minutes a day. We can meditate on the earth, so laying flat on the earth and reconnecting with the planet in that way, and allowing that energy to flow back through our bodies. We can use hydrotherapy, go to the beach, go out in the morning when there's dew on the grass, take your shoes off and walk on the dewy grass, and let that stimulate your life force, let that stimulate your nervous system. You'll feel that, I promise you, especially in the middle of winter. And we can utilize our diets to ensure that we're getting as much life force as possible from the foods that we're taking into our body. Because as I said earlier, this connection into the life force that flows through the planet is occurring in plants as well. That's how they receive their vitality. That's how they're able to grow. That's how they're able to be alive in the way that we can feel they're alive. So what that suggests is that wherever we can, if we are eating fresh fruits and vegetables, if they're fresh especially, then they are going to contain a certain amount of life force and vitality, which can then be transferred into our bodies. Because of course, like with us, so as long as that apple is connected to the tree, it's receiving life force from the planet. It's coming up through the planet, through that trunk, through that xylem flow, and it's receiving that life force and receiving that vitality. Once that apple is picked, it still contains life force and vitality because that's contained within the cells, within the structure itself, like with us. But the longer that apple is disconnected from the tree, the more that life force is going to deplete and is going to degrade. And we see that when we measure certain nutrients in things. Like vitamin C, it depletes very quickly once something is removed from its natural source, but it's also better sustained when it's immediately put into the freezer. More vitamin C is held in that way. It's not the same for all of the nutrients. They're all different. But basically the crux of that is that the fresher the fruits and the vegetables, the higher the presence of life force is going to be, and the more our body is going to be able to absorb life force and vitality from the fruits and the vegetables and the foods that we're eating. So wherever possible, fresh is better. Wherever there's anything living in the food that you're taking down, that's why there's this big thing with fermented foods as well, because there's living bacteria in those foods. And in sourdoughs as well, there's living cultures in those foods, and as you eat those foods, you're absorbing the life force of those cultures and of those bacteria at the same time. So it's looking at those living, raw, fresh fruits and vegetables wherever possible. But again, only if your vitality is high enough to be able to handle that. Because what we see, and what I see sometimes in some of my clients, is when they're in a state of lowered vitality, if we try to put all of that life force into them really suddenly through their diet, through all of these raw foods, the body can't handle it. It doesn't have the resources, it doesn't have the energy, because it takes energy to extract life force and extract energy from our food. It just does. Digestion is an enormous process that requires a lot of input and, again, a lot of energy. And if your vitality is high, then you have that energy, you have that agni, you have that fire available to you to be able to break these foods down and to absorb the life force and absorb the nutrients from these foods. But someone who is in a depleted state and who does not have a necessarily high vitality, often what I feel and what I prescribe for these people is to eat lots of root vegetables and to eat lots of stews and soups. So foods that are still alive, still packed full of vegetables and alive in that way, but are easier and simpler for the body to be able to digest. Warming foods, nice warm, slippery, wet foods like bone broths and things like that, which still contain that vitality, but in a form that's going to be easier and actually possible for that body which is in that depleted state to be able to absorb. So this is something that you need to feel into. How much of these foods can your body actually handle? Is it causing harm? Is it actually uplifting you? And you can work with your naturopath, your doctor, your dietitian, whoever, to sort this out and to feel into this, because it's different for everyone. It's different for everyone in all these different phases of healing and in all these different frequencies of vitality. And it depends on what's possible for your body as well, because everybody is programmed to be capable of different things and to be able to contain more life force or less life force. And it's something that's very fluid and very unique based on the individual. This is just the generals, the kind of general overview and the general facts that I'm giving you here. So of course, since the flow of this vitality is perhaps so dependent, this flow of life force is perhaps so dependent on the structure of the water in our bodies and in the presence of the water in our bodies, drinking lots of fresh, mineral-rich water is also going to be essential and vital in reconnecting you with the life force and allowing the life force to actually plug in and connect with you, because it's through the water in your body that the life force is able to move through your body and connect in with you in that way. So the uptake of water, again, hugely and vitally important. Getting enough sleep is important as well, because if you're not sleeping, if you're not letting yourself rest, if you're not letting your body go into its restorative mode, because that's what happens when we sleep. The body regenerates. It goes through a big clearing. There's this cleansing of toxins that happens, and there's this regeneration that can happen. Regeneration that can only happen in the sleep state. So if you're depriving yourself of sleep and not allowing yourself to sleep, then through the day, because you haven't gone through that proper cleansing that could happen and you haven't regenerated in the way that you could, then you're having to catch up with this through the day, which means that you are drawing on life force. You're using extra resources to keep your body going and to keep yourself functioning. Life force, which could be used for something else. So you're drawing more. You're requiring more, you're chewing up more to keep your body functioning and to keep your body moving. So that rest is so essential, and so many of us aren't getting enough rest. We're not spending enough time in bed, sleeping. So getting that sorted out is going to be a really important part of increasing the vitality and reconnecting with life force as well. And then there are obvious things like spending as much time as we can not in Wi-Fi, not in the range of Wi-Fi, spending as much time as we can not in front of a screen, not connected to our mobile phones, because wherever that mobile phone is, as we've explored, the blood, the life force, the chi is going to stop flowing. So it's spending time away from these devices and spending time just being with nature. Spending time away from these harmful electromagnetic fields, taking off the smartwatch and letting your wrist be free so that there can be some blood flow and vital force moving into your hand. And it's just simple things like this, nuts and seeds, coming back to the diet, full of life force and vitality. Of course, disconnected from their source for a period of time, so as fresh as possible is going to be best, but they still contain that rich earthy, there's like an earthy kind of nutrition in the nuts and seeds. And again, going to the beach, spending time in the bath with magnesium salts, which are great for the electrical circuitry in the body, but taking care of ourselves and spending time, again, spending time in the sun, spending time in the planet, spending time being still, spending time meditating, and allowing our bodies to regenerate and to take on that life force and not unnecessarily deplete the life force that is there and the life force that is present. So that's keeping it really simple, really. It's over and over again, it's returning to those basics. Water, diet, rest, spending time outside, spending time away from the things that are harmful, and really, I guess, consciously holding that as a goal to regenerate and to start feeling the flows of this life force in our bodies again, and to start experiencing that as something that you're consciously aware of. So I just leave that there with you today, and I'll let you feel into that and let you explore that, and maybe spend some time getting a feel and a sense of your level of vitality and where that's tripping you up, what's dragging that down, what's getting in the way of that life force being in free flow, and feeling into the things that are going to be supportive. Again, something that we briefly touched on yesterday was the clarity of the blood. So that means that allowing the blood to be as clean as possible, which means that because if the blood gets too viscous and gets too filled with stuff, like toxins and things that aren't necessary, then that can stop and that can block the flow of the blood as well. So it's removing toxins and harmful chemicals from our diet, but from our environment as much as possible as well, is going to free up and allow this natural flow of the life force and the blood to occur as well, and decrease that viscosity so that the blood isn't sticky and getting stuck. But that's mostly the water, lots and lots of water, drinking lots and lots of water, that's going to allow the blood to become more fluid and to be less sticky as well. So just explore all of that. I know it's a lot, but it's also very simple. I'm just I hope helping you to understand how we are connected with nature and how we can work with nature to bring about an experience of health and vitality for ourselves. And again, spend time with that, feel into how that feels for you, where that sits with you, and start exploring some things that you can perhaps begin to tweak and have a bit of a play with and see what happens.